Welcome back to Cross to Cross Conversations. I'm Monica. This is the third time, the third effort I am doing to record this message. The first two that I recorded, I didn't have to redo them. I was able to do them and I just posted. But this time, the first time, I recorded over an hour worth of conversation. And guess what? I can literally see it next to me recording, but when I played it back, it was actually silent. Some of you may say, well, Monica, you didn't check your audio. Like literally, I can see the green moving back and forth as it hears the breath of my voice. So it was recording, but during playback, I heard nothing. The second time I recorded, and then all of a sudden, it just stopped recording. Again, this is the third attempt. I will finish it. Before we get into today's episode, I need to address something. Since I started this series a couple of days ago, I received some interesting feedback. Monica, why are you doing this? Monica, this isn't promoting the kingdom. I'll pray for you, but I'm not watching this. You're out of your element. And I thought about that. Not that it was going to deter me from finishing the series. I'm committed to finishing it. In fact, I read something or study something every day that makes me, at first I was only going to have 5 episodes, but now it has extended to possibly 12, and I may have to combine some episodes, but we'll see. We'll see. And originally I was going to do 5, but 1 week was going to go over into March. But now instead of weeks, I'm saying episodes, because I realized that I'm going to post these as often as I can, whether it's every day or every other day. But with that, I've gotten that feedback. And as I was thinking about it and even wondering if I was going to address it, I do believe it was important to address, because as I was thinking about it, a movie came to mind and some thoughts came to mind. I was like, that's it. And the thing is, I was going to talk about this movie anyway, because it comes up in another episode that I'm going to do. But it's time for it now. And I want to talk about that, because that response that I'm getting, it's exactly what that 1988 film called They Lived warned us about. So for those of you who haven't heard the movie called They Live, let me just give you a brief synopsis on what I'm doing. As a result of my thoughts from this morning, I actually even changed the title of this episode and a couple of the future episodes. And so in They Live, a homeless man finds special sunglasses that lets him see the world as it really is. And when he puts the sunglasses on, he sees hidden messages everywhere. And what he sees words like obey, consume, submit, stay asleep, no independent thought. And who were the people in power in that movie? They're disguised. You can only see the people if you put on the glasses, because without the glasses, they look like your normal, everyday people. But when you put on the glasses, you will see that who they really are. And so the whole system is designed to keep people compliant. And what most people can't see, that they're like these messages that they're getting that is trying to keep them compliant. It's not because the truth isn't there, but it's because like there's this broadcast signal keeping them asleep. And so when he discovers the truth, the main character in the movie, when he discovers the truth, he tries to force his friend to put on the glasses, and his friend fights him. For over 5 minutes, we see this fight, this brutal, desperate, exhausting fight of this guy that's trying to get his friend to put on the glasses. It's not because the glasses are broken. It's not because the truth isn't real, but it's because his friend doesn't want to see. He doesn't want to put on the glasses so that he's able to really see. And because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see it, you're responsible and you're going to have to do something about it. So for his friend, staying asleep was so much easier. And so when I get messages like, Monica, this isn't kingdom work, let me tell you something. Black people have been wearing those glasses for over 400 years. We don't need special sunglasses, though, to see the hidden messages in America. right? I'm not talking about the victim mentality. I'm not talking about always pulling the race card. I'm not talking about any of that. But what we're saying is that there is a system out there that feeds us information, right? There's a system that feeds people information to keep you compliant with the narrative. And that's why people want to say, oh, that was a long time ago. Oh, you're just playing the victim. You weren't really a slave, so why does it matter? So, we've always seen it. Why? Because in certain ways we have been oppressed. Not to use that as an excuse, but it's truly what is going on in America. And so America has been asleep. And so this Black History series, I'm going to hand you the glasses. Now you have a choice. You can put them on and see, or you can fight me and stay asleep. You can keep scrolling, you can unsubscribe, or you can say, I'll pray for you and ignore the truth. Or you can do what Cross to Cross Ministries has always told you to do. You can put aside what you've been told and look at what's really true. Because here's what I know. Teaching the truth is always kingdom work. Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Not you will know the comfortable version of history. Not you will just know enough to feel good about yourself. No, you will know the truth. And the truth is this. America was built on stolen land and stolen labor. The church, some of them blessed it. The government codified it. And we're still living with those consequences. That's not something that divides. That's just history. That's the truth. And that's not out of my element. That scripture applied to reality. And see, some of you think promoting the kingdom means only talking about Jesus and like he's in this spiritual vacuum. So you avoid controversial topics, or you tell people to stay in your lane, or you want to not make certain people uncomfortable. So you pretend that oppression doesn't exist if we just preach the gospel. But let me remind you of something of what Jesus actually did. He called out religious leaders for their hypocrisy. He challenged systems that oppress the poor. He touched the untouchable. He named injustice out loud. He flipped tables in the temple. He stood with the marginalized, even when it cost him everything. And that is kingdom work. So when people say, I'll pray for you, but I won't watch, that's that same energy that says, oh, I'll pray for the poor, but I won't address poverty. I'll pray for healing, but I won't acknowledge what caused the wound. Or I'll pray for unity, but I won't deal with the division. See, prayer without action is incomplete. Faith without works is dead, and you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And you can't say that you grieve over this stuff when you don't even grieve over the situations and the oppression that happened for over 400 years. So this episode it was just called Hidden Figures, but now I've added, are you ready to put on the glasses? Because today we are talking about hidden figures. We're talking about Black excellence that was erased, Black brilliance that was stolen, Black genius that was hidden for years. And so we're going to talk about these hidden messages, like what happens when you put on the glasses. You'll see why. You'll see the hidden messages. You'll see the hidden messages that says, obey the narrative that white men built America alone, or consume the lie that Black people contributed nothing. Submit to a version of history where we're invisible, or stay asleep so you never have to face what was stolen. And there's another thing that's dropping in me right now. Or continue to believe that the white man stops you from moving ahead in life. But we're not doing that anymore. I'm handing you the glasses, and today's episode is your choice. Are you ready to see? Or are you going to keep fighting to stay asleep? Because I promise you this, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and your life will never be the same. So are you ready to put on the glasses? Okay, good. Then let's talk about hidden figures. So last episode, we talked about the kind of faith that sustained enslaved people through the Middle Passage, through over 200 years of brutal bondage, through an unimaginable suffering. We talked about how they survived when the system was designed to break them. But this week, we're shifting gears. We're going to talk about excellence, because here's what people tried to hide. They tried to hide that Black people have always been brilliant, Always from the very beginning. We've been innovators, inventors, scientists, mathematicians, engineers, doctors, artists, entrepreneurs. We've built America. Literally, we've advanced civilization. We've solved problems that others couldn't solve. And so, what you weren't taught about us was everything that we're going to talk about today. So your history books didn't mention us. Your science classes skipped over us. Your textbooks credited others for inventions that Black people created. Why? Because acknowledging Black brilliance would destroy the entire myth of white supremacy. If people knew that Black people, these the Black people that were enslaved, they were oppressed, they were denied education. These Black people were creating groundbreaking innovations. And so the lie that we're inferior would fall apart if this was acknowledged. So they hit us deliberately, systematically. And so this is called Hidden Figures, Black Excellence Erased. And today we're bringing some names back. We're going to tell the stories they tried to bury. So before we dive into the names of the inventions, we need to understand why these figures were hidden in the first place. See, we were told a lie. A lie was built, and that was the lie that white people are inherently superior. They're smarter, more civilized, or more capable. And so to believe that, then you had to believe that Black people were inherently inferior. But see, that was a lie that was used to justify slavery. And so that lie was also used to justify Jim Crow, the separate but equal nonsense. That lie is still being used today to justify inequality. But here's the problem with that lie. It only works if you can hide the evidence that contradicts it. But the evidence that's out there is so overwhelming. Black people have been innovating since we arrived on these shores. Enslaved people brought that agricultural knowledge from Africa that made southern plantations profitable. So that doesn't fit the narrative, though, so it's not taught. So after emancipation, Black people, again, remember, many of whom have been denied the right to learn, the right to read, they started inventing, creating, building, and despite having no access to formal education, despite being denied patents in many cases, despite having their ideas stolen, Black people produced groundbreaking innovations. But acknowledging that would mean admitting that the system was wrong. It meant that Black people were never inferior, that the entire justification for slavery, segregation, and ongoing oppression was a lie. So instead, they hid us. They erased our names from textbooks. They credited white men for our inventions, and they pretended we didn't exist. And for generations, Black children grew up believing that lie, believing they came from nothing, believing that people had contributed nothing to the world, right? That's why this matters, and that's why we're reclaiming these names. So the first name I want to bring up is Benjamin Banneker. He was born in 1731, and he was a free Black man in Maryland. His grandmother had been an indentured servant from England, and she married a formerly enslaved man, and that gave Benjamin a complicated legal status that allowed him to be free during that time. But even though he was free, he had almost no formal education, so he taught himself. He borrowed books, he studied mathematics, astronomy, and engineering on his own. In 1753, when he was just 22 years old, Benjamin built the first wooden clock that was made entirely in America. And so he carved every gear, every piece by hand, and the clock kept accurate time for over 50 years. And people came from all over to see it. They couldn't believe that a Black man had built it. They accused him of stealing the design. But Benjamin, he proved them wrong. He explained the mathematics behind it. He explained the mechanics, the engineering, and he explained how he designed it all himself. And it was later in his life that Benjamin became an astronomer and a surveyor. So in 1791, he was hired to help survey the land for Washington, D.C., the nation's new capital. He worked assigned Andrew Ellicott, a white surveyor. But when Ellicott had to leave the project early, Benjamin recreated the entire plan from memory. So think about that. He memorized the complex survey of what would become Washington, D.C., and he recreated it accurately. That's the level of brilliance that we're talking about here. And so Benjamin also published almanacs. These were incredibly complex, requiring advanced mathematics, and he did it all without formal training. So in 1791, Benjamin wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson. And in the letter, he actually challenged Jefferson's racism. He sent Jefferson a copy of his almanac as proof of black intellectual capability. And then he wrote, let me read what he wrote. I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you to need a proof here, that we are a race of beings who have been long labored under the abuse and censure of the world, that we have long been looked upon with an eye of contempt, and that we have long been considered rather as brutish than human, and scarcely capable of mental endowments. So he was calling Jefferson out. He was doing it with evidence, and that evidence he used was his own work. And that proved that black people were just as capable as anyone else. And so Jefferson responded politely, but he never changed his views on slavery. But Benjamin's legacy remains. He was a genius, and even in his own time, people couldn't fully erase him, even though they tried to. So the next name I want to move to is Lewis Latimer. He was born in 1848 to parents who had escaped slavery. Lewis is not a name most people know, but you know his work, because every time you turn on a light, like if you're getting benefit, if you turn it on a light, you're getting benefit from what Latimer actually invented. So in school, you were taught that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, but here's what they didn't teach you. So Edison's light bulb didn't work very well. It burned out quickly, sometimes maybe in just a few hours. So, and it was very expensive to produce. And it wasn't practical for like widespread use. And so Latimer actually solved the problem. Latimer invented the carbon filament. That was a much more durable and efficient way to produce light. His carbon filament made light bulbs last longer and cost less. And that's what made electric lighting practical and affordable for homes and businesses. But who gets all of the credit? Edison. And which name do you know? Edison's. So Latimer also worked on Alexander Graham Bell's his patent for the telephone. He drafted the drawings and documents for Bell's patent application, but Bell got all of the credit. So Latimer actually worked for Edison's company. He was the only black member of Edison's elite research team called the Edison Pioneers, but even then his contributions were minimized. He also wrote the first book on electric lightning that was published back in 1890. He was an expert in the field, but again, history forgot him. Let's move on to Garrett Morgan. So Garrett Morgan, he was born in 1877 in Kentucky. He had a sixth grade education. That's it. But he was quite brilliant. In 1914, Garrett invented the safety hood, and this was a device that allowed firefighters and rescue workers to breathe when they're in smoke-filled environments. So it was essentially a gas mask, but they were called it a safety hood. And so in 1916, there was a tunnel explosion in Cleveland, and workers were trapped underground, and toxic gas was filling the tunnel. And rescue workers couldn't get to them without passing out or dying. So when Morgan heard about it, he grabbed his safety hood and he went to the site, and he volunteered to go down into the tunnel. He saved multiple lives that day. He had to pull out unconscious workers, out of that tunnel while he was wearing his own invention. So he became a hero that day. And newspapers, they covered his story. But then they found out he was black. And so suddenly the orders that he was getting for his safety hood, they were canceled. And the fire departments that had been interested, they stopped responding. And so some people even like demanded refunds. So Garrett was forced to hire a white man to pose as the inventor when demonstrating his project to white clients. He had to pretend he was just an assistant. That's just how deep the racism went. So even when a black man invented something that saved lives, that literally saved lives, people refused to use it if they knew he was black. So now let's move over to the hidden figures, right? The hidden figures, we're going to talk about the women who put the men on the moon. Their names were Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. And if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you know these names. But until that movie came out in 2016, most people had never heard of them. I knew I hadn't heard of them. These women were mathematicians at NASA during the space race. And I'm not talking about simple calculations, I'm talking about complex orbital mechanics, trajectory calculations, and computations that determined whether astronauts lived or died. So the first one we're going to talk about is Katherine Johnson. She calculated the flight path for Alan Shepard. He was the first American in space in 1961. She also calculated the trajectory for John Glenn's orbit around the Earth in 1962. So NASA back then had computers at that time, like actual computers. But John Glenn, he didn't trust them. So before his flight, he specifically asked for Katherine to verify that computer's calculation by hand. Think about that. He asked her to verify it by hand. And he said, get the girl to check the numbers. And if she says they're good, then he's ready to go. The girl. That's what they called her. She had a degree in mathematics. She had been doing these calculations for years, but she was still the girl. And so Katherine worked on the Apollo 11 mission as well. And that was the one that put men on the moon in 1969. Her calculations were critical to that mission's success. Now we're going to talk about Dorothy Vaughan. She was a mathematician and NASA's first black supervisor. So when IBM computers were brought to NASA, Dorothy knew that human computers, and so the human computers were people who did the calculations by hand. That's what they called them, human computers. And so she knew that the human computers would become obsolete. So she taught herself and her team Fortran, a computer program language, so that they could transition into programming the new machines. She wasn't told to do this. She wasn't given any training. She saw that was what was coming and taught herself and her entire team so they wouldn't lose their jobs. That's leadership and that's brilliance. And I chuckle at that because I remember when I first went to high school, and in my freshman year, I took a Fortran class. And I ended up dropping it because I just couldn't grasp the complexity of it. Although I had a desire to understand computers more in the coding, I just could not grasp it. My 14-year-old self could not grasp it at the time. And so when I read this lady who was born several years before me, that she taught herself Fortran and her team, I just can't even imagine. Okay, so the last one is Mary Jackson. She was an engineer. She was NASA's first black female engineer, actually. But she couldn't get the official title of engineer because NASA required advanced engineering courses that were only offered at an all-white school in Virginia. So Mary had to petition the court for permission to attend classes at that school. So think about that a little bit. She had to go to court just to be allowed to take the classes she needed for a job that she was already doing. But the thing is, she won. She took the classes, she became an engineer, and she spent her career fighting for other women and people of color to have opportunities at NASA as well. So these women were doing the calculations that put men on in space. They put men on the moon, but for decades, no one knew their name. Why? Because they were black and they were women. So acknowledging their brilliance would mean admitting that the people doing the most important work weren't who people thought it was. It wasn't the people who was actually getting credit for the work. No, it was black women. And so, just a few more names I want to put out there. Dr. Patricia Bath, born in 1942, she invented laser cataract surgery. She was able to restore sight to people who had been blind for over 30 years. Then there's Otis Boykin. He invented the electrical resistor. He was born back in 1920. The electrical resistor was used in computers, radios, television, and he also invented a control unit for pacemakers. And we know that pacemakers have saved countless lives. But again, a lot of people don't know his name. And this other one that I'm going to mention, this last one, Lonnie Johnson, it shocked me. So he was born in 1949, and he's a NASA engineer who worked on the Galileo mission to Jupiter and the Cassini mission to Saturn. But you probably know him for something else. He invented the Super Soaker water gun. Yes, a NASA engineer who worked on space missions also invented one of the most popular toys in history. And still, most people don't know his name or his background. You know, I can keep going. There's hundreds more. But that one that really shocked me was this Lonnie Johnson. I had no idea a black man invented the Super Soaker gun. And so what's the pattern that we see? You have to ask yourself, why does this keep happening? Why do we keep discovering that black people made these incredible contributions, but their names were erased? So during slavery, enslaved people couldn't hold patents. And if an enslaved person invented something, the enslaver could claim ownership and patent it in his own name. The enslaved person got nothing. They didn't get any credit. They didn't get any money, no recognition. So you have to think, how many inventions were credited to other people that were actually created by enslaved black people? We'll never know, because that system was designed to keep it from us. But after slavery, black people could technically hold patents, but they faced massive discrimination. Banks wouldn't loan them money, right, to develop the inventions. Manufacturers wouldn't work with them. And then white investors would steal their ideas and patent it under their own names. So even when black inventors succeeded despite all of that, they were erased from the history books. Their contributions were minimized or ignored. Again, you have to ask yourself why. Why? Because white supremacy depends on the myth that white people are the innovators, like they're the geniuses, the ones who built civilization. And to admit that black people are just as brilliant, it destroys that myth. So if the myth fails, the whole system of oppression loses its justification. But you have to remember, we're still here and we're still creating and we're still reclaiming our names. So why does this matter? Why spend an entire episode talking about inventors and scientists from decades or centuries ago? Because black children need to see themselves as innovators. They need to know they came from brilliance. They need to know their ancestors weren't just enslaved. They were geniuses who survived and created despite being enslaved. Other children need to know the truth as well. They need to know that the comfortable narrative that they've been taught is a lie. And because we all need to understand that excellence has always been there. Black brilliance didn't just start with integration or the civil rights movement or affirmative action. No, it's been there since the beginning. We have innovated while enslaved, even though we didn't get any credit for it. We invented after emancipation, despite being denied education and resources. And we've been doing groundbreaking work at NASA, in medicine, in engineering, in technology, despite systemic racism. Excellence has always been here. And if black people could do all of this while being oppressed, imagine what we can do with true equality. Imagine what we can do if the playing field was actually level. And that's what scares the system. And that's why they keep trying to hide it from us. But we won't stay hidden. So here's what I need you to understand. The series is about handing you the glasses. Remember, week one, we talked about, not week one, but in episode one, we talked about, am I really black? How people would always ask me if I'm really black. So that was about identity. And then episode 2, we talked about the faith that sustained, right? That was about survival. But today, in this episode, I'm asking, are you ready to put on the glasses? Because that's about consciousness. Because everything that I'm teaching you, it's been hidden in plain sight. Black excellence has been hidden. Black contributions have been erased. Black genius was stolen and rebranded as achievement done by others. And when you put on glasses, though, you see it everywhere in your history books, in your movies, in your churches, in your systems. The messages has always been there. And what have those messages been? Again, obey the version of history that centers on other people, other non-black people. Consume the lie that black people have no history worth teaching. Submit to a narrative where we're just sidekicks, not heroes. Or stay asleep so you never have to reckon with what was taken. But those glasses, they're sitting right in front of you, and all you have to do is put them on. So next week, we're going to talk about what you see when you put the glasses on. And I'm warning you now, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, because episode 4 is called The Price of Freedom. And we're going to go deep into the brutality you've been taught to ignore, such as slavery, Jim Crow, lynching, convict leasing, the Middle Passage, Dred Scott, Rosewood, all of those things. But it's all of those things that the broadcast system, and I'm using quotes, it's all of those things that you've been told not to look at. But if you're still with me after today, and if you picked up the glasses, then you're ready. This is Monica with Cross to Cross Conversations. The reckoning is here. Talk to you next time.